I walked in on some of the students watching a movie this last week that made me think of the Beatitudes. Inspiring message. It has kind of a whimsical title to it. It's like the flowers of St. Francis. No. Like the lilies of St. Lucy. No, the Wolf of Wall Street. That was it. It was the Wolf on Wall Street. Okay. Very inspiring film. But I did think it was interesting because that came out. If you have not seen it before, you can receive communion today. If you have seen it, I'll see you in confession first. It is quite the film. But I've been thinking about and praying about the Beatitudes all this week when this kind of came to the fore. And nothing is more opposed to probably Christ's image of what it means to live a blessed life than what is presented to us in Scorsese's film Wolf on Wall Street, which is all about just how far you can go in taking money from other people as a broker and using it for your own good and exploitation of women, drugs, and all the like. It's the ultimate epitome of the American dream. Even if we say we don't agree with it, morally, I think we can all be honest that there's something that attracts us to those kind of persons and those kind of lifestyles. Who wouldn't want to have all the money you can spend, right? All the freedom to do whatever you want, to be desired by anyone and everyone because of it, so you go anywhere you want at any given time, to be in one thing Leonardo DiCaprio said, he goes, the one thing we never wanted was a normal life. So to just be out of the mundane aspects of life, to be above it all. I think there's something in that is attractive to every human being. And so we really have to ask ourselves, what is God's idea of what it means to live a blessed life versus the image that the world tells us of what it means to have a blessed life? And how am I measuring my own life accordingly? Is it more by the standards of the world, or is it by the standards of Christ, of what he says in today's gospel? Because the world tells us to be blessed means abundance. I think that's what it comes down to. The more you have of anything, the more blessed we are. So the more beautiful I am, the bigger body, the smarter, the younger, more ambitious, the more powerful I am, the richer I am, the more influential, more athletic, more skilled, then I'm blessed. I'm blessed by God, right? And Drake even has a song called Blessings. Someone showed it like, hey, this is I think it's kind of a Christian song. And he's singing about like, oh, I feel blessed. I'm so up, I feel blessed. And then he goes on to say how he has all the women, fame, money, vacations, drinks, drugs, and health that he could desire. And therefore, he's blessed. And that's what happens when we take the worldly standards. It's almost like Jesus Christ saying yes to every temptation of the devil in the desert and walking out with a bunch of bread and armies and everyone following him and saying, wow, the Father's really blessed me. But we can kind of have that image of, we got to be honest of how we see our own lives, right? Even us, when we're going through hard times, when we don't feel like God's listening to our prayers, maybe we're having financial difficulties, relationships break up, right? Things just aren't working out for me. I don't feel blessed by God, I feel cursed by God. And yet when things are opposite, when everything's going well in my life, I say, wow, I'm so blessed. God's really present in my life. So we can measure ourselves in the same way when it comes to the spiritual life. And yet Christ says poverty, suffering, rejection, persecution, that's blessed. The world blesses abundance. Christ blesses deprivations. Blessed are you who are poor, you who mourn, you who hunger and thirst, you who are rejected. The kingdom is yours. So Pope Benedict, he asked this question in his book, Jesus of Nazareth, and I think it's a question every single person needs to contend with. He says, the fundamental question arises, is the direction the Lord shows us in the Beatitudes and in the corresponding warnings, because he says also, woe to you who laugh now, woe to you who have your fill now, for you will suffer. He says, is this the right one? Is it really such a bad thing to be rich, to have one's fill, to laugh, to be praised? I mean, was Jesus kind of a resentful loser? Like the guy that didn't get invited to the party, so resented everybody who did. He couldn't get a date, so he talked a lot about purity. Right? He came from a poor family, so he condemned riches. It sounds ludicrous, and yet that's the philosophy that so many in our times run by. That was Nietzsche's biggest criticism of Christianity. He said Christianity is a religion of resentment. He said that he called Christian morality a capital crime against life. He goes, it's not Christian doctrine that needs to be criticized. It's Christian morality that needs to be exposed. Exposed as a capital crime against life. What has been the greatest sin on earth so far, he asked. What is the greatest sin? Surely the words of the man who said, woe to those who laugh now. So how did this philosophy of Nietzsche come about? And communism says the same thing. Communism says that religion is the opiate of the masses, right? Those who have not being jealous of those who have, and so they just imagine a world in the future where they'll have their riches and their blessings. And that's actually why, Mother Teresa, if you ever look her up on YouTube, she was absolutely hated by atheists. There's documentaries all around saying why she contributed more to suffering in this world than anyone else. Why? Because she taught people to embrace their sufferings, to understand their privations as gifts from God, and to long for heaven. And so atheists say her preaching such a doctrine keeps people low and keeps us in a squalor in this world. And so looking at those two viewpoints, Nietzsche, communism, Wolf on Wall Street, versus Mother Teresa and the gospel, the Beatitudes that we heard today, the teachings of Christ, what does it come down to? And that was my question. What's the difference between what's being blessed in the world versus being blessed by God? I think it comes down to one thing. What happens after death? Because if death is just the end, then there's no reason to ever embrace your suffering. We should all be striving to get as much as we can out of life. And anything that gets in the way of our pleasure, of our personal happiness, we should try to eradicate so that we can live the best possible life here now, because nothing comes after that. But if what Jesus said is true, it's all the conditions are, you who suffer now, you will be satisfied. You will be comforted. You will gain eternal life. They're eternal promises. And to really live the Beatitudes, we have to live and believe in eternity. That's the difference. Those who are living for the kingdom of earth and those who are living for the kingdom of heaven. If when I die, according to our faith, we will all be judged, and upon that judgment of how I lived my life, how I followed Jesus Christ, we will go to eternal heaven or eternal hell. Then all of a sudden, if I have to suffer now for the weight of eternal glory, it's a wonderful thing. And that's why St. Paul said, if we do not believe in the resurrection, we're the most foolish and contemptible of all. Because our life is to be lived for the sake of heaven. And that's why St. Paul could say, for I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the weight of eternal glory that shall be revealed to us in the next life. The Beatitudes are for those who are living for heaven. And the world is divided between those who are living for heaven and those who are living for heaven on earth. And Drake even says in his song at one point, you don't have to listen to it, just take my word, but he says, I can't imagine heaven being any better than what I got on earth. I'm not here for a long time. I'm here for a good time. So when we stop looking for heaven in heaven, because we're made for that eternal happiness, we start looking for heaven on earth. Now, it reminded me of a story of a saint we just celebrated this past week. His name was St. Peter Nolasco. He lived in Spain in the 1200s. And for the past 500 years before this time, the Muslims and the Christians were at war a lot. So there's a lot of just sacking of villages and taking slaves. Right? But the Muslims, especially around the coastal regions of Europe, continually were sacking the Christian villages. And if they didn't kill you, they would take you as hostages and then put you in slavery. And then it became so common that this was one of the main trading goods of the market in the time, was buying back Christians. It's all over the place. And Peter, he was born to a very rich family. He was very blessed in this world in every way. He had a great education growing up, a lot of money, a high family. The whole world was open to him. But one time when he was prayer, he had a deep religious fervor. One time when he was at prayer, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to him. And she showed him an image of all these people who were suffering, who'd been separated from their family, women and children, young men, separated from their family and living in slavery and squalor. And she said, Will you go to help them? Will you leave everything to save them? And he was so inspired by this vision, he went out and started a new order called the Mercenarians. And what they would do is a bunch of men who would take the 3 vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience, right? So like a religious order. But then they took an extra 4th vow. This is from their constitution. All the brothers of the order must always be gladly disposed to give up their lives if it is necessary, as Jesus Christ gave up his life for us in order to redeem the enslaved. So their 4th vow was that if we have no other way of saving these people, we trade ourselves for them. We let them go so we become enslaved so they can go free. That's an image of the Beatitudes. The life of St. Francis, who embraced radical poverty in this life, is an image of the Beatitudes. St. Mother Teresa, who really just embraced the mercy and the love and the peace of God far more than so many, was an image of the Beatitudes. And my point is, we can't do that unless we're living for heaven. If we're living for heaven, we're capable of making that kind of sacrifice in our life to follow Jesus Christ and to help others. And the other thing that we don't realize, what this world tells us, is that it's all about you, right? It's all about getting what you want in life, filling up yourself. And it sounds really nice and it sounds positive. The problem, and I thought this was the worst aspect of The Wolf on Wall Street, was the fact that it never showed the damage that was done in people's lives in the background, for the most part. You didn't really get to see the wake of destruction that one man's ambitions created for so many, because he was basically stealing from low-class people, because rich people didn't fall for his scams. So he had to steal from low-class, middle-class people to make himself rich. How many lives did he have to destroy so that he himself could get what he wanted? And that's what we have to think about, is to the degree that I seek my own ego, my own pleasure, at what cost does it come for those around me? And to me, the worst image of this, but the best image of this, is something we all deal with, our own families, our own lives, is divorce. The world holds up divorce as if it's the greatest liberation of our times. To marry whoever you want, whenever you want, and to divorce whenever you want. But who pays the price of that? It's the family. The breakdown of the family, and especially the sufferings of the children. But the world doesn't talk about that. And what the Beatitudes do is they lead us into becoming like Jesus Christ. And God is not beautiful. God is not great because he's up there in heaven, like flexing. He's got some big biceps. He's amazing, Like God, that's not what attracts us about God. What's beautiful about God is that he is love and that he empties himself for our salvation. The incarnation of God in the flesh is beautiful. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ on the cross is beautiful. And God becoming present right here on this altar in the Holy Eucharist is beautiful because he is love. And that's what the Beatitudes are about. And that's why the world is so opposed to the Beatitudes. Because the teaching of Christ is we become beautiful and we become good and we become blessed to the degree that we sacrifice ourselves for others. We lay down our life so others can have life. And that is a mournful way. That's a sorrowful way at times. That's a way that leads to deprivation and to suffering. But it also gives life to others, and the reward we get is eternal. As we go into this Mass, let's truly reflect on our own lives. The way I measure myself, my success, my blessings, my curses, is it according to what the world says is good? Or is it according to the words of Jesus Christ? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Do not be afraid of the Beatitudes. Do not be afraid of the suffering that comes with following Jesus Christ. It is the way to the greatest happiness that we were always made for, with Jesus Christ forever in heaven.